The situation in Lebanon is really complex, and obviously with Hezbollah, Iran proxy based there, and very much sort of running the country, as it were. We've seen the attacks coming out of Lebanon, and also threats from Israel. But Beirut and Lebanon is ever thus. I mean, this is nothing new.
Does it make the ideology die? And I think a lot of people would say no, because even though there is that tactic, which some people push back against, ultimately, those groups have been around for so long. Is this current war really going to be the thing that finally gets rid of them?
No. And I was very clear about Hamas is not going to disappear. Hezbollah is not going to disappear. The radical ideologies they come from are not going to disappear. They're going to be with us. But there is another aspect here that has to be addressed, and that is the fact that at the same time, they are also playing as a political player. They are doing that already for a long period of time. There is a lot of, if you go to hashtags, we don't want to be dragged to this war. Lebanon doesn't want to be part of this war. You hear constantly, day in, day out, Lebanese politicians, Lebanese, people, journalists, and many of them, they are expressing a very clear message. They're saying, they're actually turning to the world, and they are saying to the world openly, they say, help us, save us. We are occupied by Iran and Hezbollah. And they are saying openly and overtly, in many different ways, we don't want to be dragged to this war. This is not our war. We don't want to be the one that pays the check for the Hezbollah and the Iranians' ambitions. But they are kidnapped. They are terrorized by the Hezbollah. And the Hezbollah basically kidnapped Lebanon from within. It became actually an Iranian satellite to a large extent. And the Lebanese are caught in a very tragic situation. Hezbollah knows that in the end of the day, in Lebanon, the Lebanese are out crying, we don't want to be dragged to this war.
I think there's every probability that what you described is going to happen, and that Iran will launch some kind of attack on Israel, as it did on the 14th of April, probably in conjunction with Hezbollah in the north. Maybe a two-staged attack, possibly lasting several days, of missiles mainly, but they could also try and push some kind of ground operation as well, but not by Iran directly, but by its proxies, maybe attempting something along the lines of what we saw on the 7th of October. So I think that's almost an inevitability. The extent to which it succeeds is, I think, completely unknown. As you know, on the 14th of April, it failed. But I think one other thing I would say is that it's been expected here in Israel. An attack has been expected for several days, and in Tel Aviv, for example, the streets are very quiet. People who don't have to leave their homes for a specific reason, tending to stay at homes near their shelters, which is probably true throughout much of Israel now. So it's a fairly sort of uncanny quietness at the moment. I think one thing that could occur is that Israel might carry out a preemptive attack against Iran and against Hezbollah. There's been, as you know, there's been a lot of toing and froing between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. But Israel could carry out something much more significant, either against Iran or against Hezbollah or both, as a way of preempting what Iran is going to do. If that happens, it's probably likely to happen, I would have thought, as soon as Israel receives intelligence that Iran is about to strike. And then, of course, if there is an attack, there's going to be a counterattack by Israel as well. It's not going to end there, particularly. I mean, if it's an attack which, like the 14th of April, doesn't succeed, then maybe Israel won't do anything, or will do some limited response as it did to the 14th of April. But if there is severe damage in Israel, particularly if a lot of people get killed, there is going to be severe repercussions by Israel against Iran and against Hezbollah, and who knows how that could escalate.
they are also playing as a political player within their own inner sphere, within their own. Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese political system. It's part of the government. He has members in the parliament. He is participating in elections. Hamas is also part of the inner Palestinian political system. At least once in 2006, Hamas also participated in the elections and won the elections. And so they are running at the same time as the political players. That is something that brings something new to the equation. It brings something new to the equation because in the end of the day, they are not operating in a vacuum. They are willingly, knowingly, and intentionally sacrificing their own brothers and sisters. And this is something that is very important to understand, because the combination of a very radical ideology with the fact that they are willingly, knowingly, and intentionally sacrificing their own brothers and sisters obviously create a very significant challenge to deal with.
This could escalate to a much bigger thing, which at the moment, America and its coalition and its allies are obviously trying to de-escalate this as much as possible. I think, from Hezbollah, we're definitely going to see retaliation. Civilian casualties are could potentially happen due to either collateral damage or other, but I definitely see in the immediate future, as well as medium and long term, due to collateral damage or other, that it's quite potentially going to happen.
I don't see peace, but I do definitely see a continuation of a very turbulent process, which involves many things. And we'll see continuation of those turbulences. We'll see the continuation of violence. Violence has been always a part and parcel of this region. I'm always saying, in the context of the Middle East, peace is not so much a relevant term in the Middle East mindset. It's more about sustainable arrangements of calmness that could be sustained for a long time, as much as possible, and from time to time they just need to be maintained. And the way, unfortunately, they are maintained is through violence in most of the cases.
And I think the trouble is, when you have the proxies that are being guided, particularly by the Iranians, I mean, the Ayatollahs, reiterate every day they want the destruction of the Israeli state. And when they're fueling this with extreme terrorists like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, and let's not forget also the Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria, it is very difficult to see an end to this. And an outright peace is probably a nirvana that doesn't exist.